In the light of these contexts and realities of the Nigerian economy, we now present the results of the scorecard of economic performance in the last 12 months to June 2012. Our analysis reveals that 8 of the 12 domains made progress in terms of performance and scored higher in our analysis of the last 12 months to June 2012 compared to the same period a year ago. The domain of financial capital made the highest progress with a 55% improvement in its 2012 score over 2011. This was expected, as the 2012 performance improved from a low base of 2011, which was characterized by the Middle East uprisings and the Europe debt crisis, both of which ensured a major pullout of investments from emerging markets like Nigeria. The domain of macroeconomic environment also made progress with a 23% improvement in scores. In the last 12 months, the federal government had covered a 64.55% distance towards attaining specific targets of economic growth, exchange rate and external reserves, amongst others. These targets were contained mostly in the Vision 2020 implementation plan and the transformation agenda. Other domains with positive performance include science, technology, and information and communication technology, public sector governance, human capital development, infrastructure, corporate governance, and institutional effectiveness. A further breakdown of the positive performance at subdomain level showed that the highest improvement in scores came from the capital budget utilization in science and technology plus ICT sector, which was largely as a result of low score in 2011 and improvement in the budget utilization, warranting a higher score in 2012. The amount of documents required for export, which improved as a result of Nigeria's higher score in 2013 Doing Business report versus the 2012 report. Albeit, this was still a very low score, that is 2.13 points out of 10. Private sector investments and the achievement of sectoral targets also witnessed significant above-average improvements in scores. The time required to get a building permit was the area of least progress. According to the Doing Business Report 2013, this takes about 85 days in Nigeria compared to the global average of 26 days. We now turn to the results of the overall scorecard of the Nigerian economy, having taken a fresh look at the areas of progress. Our analysis of Nigeria's overall economic performance in the last 12 months to June 2012 shows that the economy scored 4.18 points on a 10-point scale. You can interpret this to mean that a distance of 41.8% has been covered in terms of attaining all of the domestic policy targets and global developmental benchmarks observed within the review period. And this leaves a distance of 58.2% yet to be covered. Overall, this present score of 4.18 is an improvement from the 3.93 scored in the same period a year ago. In summary, we can note that 7 domains scored above the aggregate, and these included corporate governance, the real sector, and the macroeconomic environment, amongst others. On the other hand, 5 domains scored below the aggregate. These included infrastructure and political governance, amongst others. In addition, 2 interesting findings were also revealed. First was that the domain of corporate governance scored the highest score of 5.64%. This is as a result of significant improvements in corporate ethics and disclosures, as well as auditing and reporting standards, especially in the financial services industry, as an aftermath of the local banking crisis. The second finding, in contrast, was that the domain of political governance scored the lowest points of 3.12. This is partly as a result of the frequent impasses between the legislature and the executive over budgetary matters, which causes delays in budget passage. Studies have shown that the budgetary process in Nigeria experiences a 4-month delay from the time of President's budget speech through the legislative process to the time of the final presidential assent. The low score is also a result of the unending probes into untraceable public funds, which have created a high level of public distrust for politicians. For instance, out of the 144 countries, the Global Competitiveness Report ranks Nigeria as 102 in terms of public distrust for politicians, 122 in terms of favoritism in decision making, and 135 in terms of the diversion of public funds. We now highlight a critical finding at the subdomain level in terms of scores that deteriorated in the 2012 scorecard compared to the same period a year ago. In the last 12 months to June 2012, the impact of terrorism on investments has deteriorated by about 65% from a very low score of 0.99% in 2011 to an even worse score of 0.35% in the 2012 scorecard. This low score is further supported by the results of the Global Competitiveness Report on the business cost of terrorism, where the country is currently ranked 139th, deteriorating further from a position of 128th in the previous year's report. These results collectively echo investor perception about extremist insurgents in northern parts of the country and gradually renewing militancy in the Niger Delta and the resultant negative impact on investments into the country. Our analysis shows that the insecurity in the nation has partly affected the size and direction of investment flows into Nigeria. For instance, in the last 12 months to June 2012, foreign investments into Nigeria have fallen by 19.14% to US dollars $10.4 billion from $12.8 billion a year ago. Furthermore, the share of foreign direct investments that is, investments in brick and mortar businesses, has shrunk to 43% from 62% a year ago. This has given way to more foreign portfolio investments in the capital market, which are also beneficial to the economy, but are more susceptible to liquidity shocks in the event of heightened global uncertainties. The final section of this scorecard presentation takes a futuristic look at Nigeria's economic standing on the global scene in the year 2020. This is to determine whether we can realize our vision of being the 20th largest economy by the year 2020 as contained in the Vision 2020 document. To determine the 20th largest economy by the year 2020, we adopted the latest update of the IMF World Economic Outlook database, October 2012, containing economic data for 186 countries from 1980 and estimated to the end of the year 2017. We filtered the countries by the gross domestic product, GDP, at purchasing power parity. Next, we calculated the 6-year compound annual growth rate for each country's GDP from 2011 to 2017. This is because the year 2011 was found to be the median year across the countries, at which point estimates were applied on actual data. Having calculated the 6-year compounded annual growth rates, we further apply this factor to project each country's GDP from 2017, which is where the IMF estimates end, to 2020. Having derived each country's GDP in the year 2020, we then sorted the countries in descending order. Based on our projections using the IMF World Economic Outlook database, our findings are that Saudi Arabia will be the 20th largest economy in the world by 2020, with a GDP of $1.2 trillion US in purchasing power parity. Nigeria, on the other hand, will be the 27th largest economy in the world by 2020, with a GDP of $864 billion in purchasing power parity terms, falling short of being the 20th largest economy by a GDP of $316 billion US. Therefore, to become the 20th largest economy by the year 2020, Nigeria needs to close a gap of $730 billion gap starting now. This is calculated as the difference between the GDP of the 20th largest economy in 2020, which is Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria's current GDP in 2012, estimated by the IMF and by the IMF as $450 billion in purchasing power parity terms. Otherwise, Nigeria could become the 20th largest economy by the year 2035, ceteris paribus. Only an accelerated pace of development, economic growth, and reforms can shorten this time frame for the country. For instance, there's a need for substantive reforms to ensure local oil refining capacity within the economy. We explain this point with our comparative analysis of Saudi Arabia and Nigeria contained in these charts. The findings are that while Nigeria would have enjoyed a faster pace of economic growth at an annual average of 7.76% by the year 2020, coming from the year 2000, Saudi Arabia would grow much slower at an average of 4.04% per year. One of the key distinguishing factors between these two oil exporters, however, is that according to IMF data, Nigeria still imports $21 billion of refined oil to satisfy its local demand capacity, which is the equivalent of 8% of 2012 GDP by our estimates. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, does not import any oil at all. In conclusion, beyond the need to ensure local oil refining capacity in Nigeria, we find a compelling need to diversify away from the monoproductive oil base. This need is illustrated by this chart, culled from The Economist magazine, which predicts oil and gas independence by the year 2035, based on countries' determination to move away from traditional energy sources. According to The Economist, and I quote, America's shale gas boom is set to reverse the flow of the international trade in oil and gas. America was until recently the world's biggest energy consumer. Now it is China. But according to the International Energy Agency, this is set to change. By 2035, America could become a significant gas exporter and could slash dependence on oil imports. With all sources of energy taken together, America could hit net self-sufficiency by 2035, end of quote. Mr. Vice President, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is of critical importance to us as a nation, given our dependence on oil for over 90% of our revenue, and given the fact that we are the fourth largest exporter of oil to America. America's eventual self-sufficiency in oil will lead to a loss of one of our largest markets and introduce more competition into the market. Therefore, this presents with utmost urgency the need to rapidly diversify away from the oil sector dependence by boosting potential growth poles in the non-oil sector, especially agriculture, manufacturing, power, and transport. I'd like to thank you for your time and your attention.